Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Anne Forster. And thank you very much for speaking with the Commonwealth of Learning. Could we begin this conversation by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks, Sam. It's really lovely to be asked to do this. I have a background now reaching into 4 decades in distance education, and I guess my starting point was with the UK Open University, and I worked in the Institute of Educational Technology. So I've been involved in the startup of several postgraduate programs, professionalising the practice of educational technology, instructional design, and project management in distance education. So I have had quite a lot of international experience. So that's sort of my background. It's a rather unconventional background.
From that experience on distance education and its role, both past, in the present, and perhaps in the future, how do you see distance education making a contribution to the future from where it has come from?
Well, I am absolutely convinced that we are on a continuous evolution with this field, and that my interest in it, the passion that drives me, is a passion around participation and access. And I think that all education opportunities should be available to everybody, so education for all as a basic principle. The aspects of distance education that I am passionately committed to have to do with the ways in which it has an approach to lowering the barriers to participation and opening up opportunities. Now that applies, and it has applied over the last 40 years, regardless of the technologies of the day, regardless of the most current emerging pedagogical practices. The focus is on learning for all. Today we speak more about, we have so many terms for exactly the same field of practice, whether it be flexible learning, blended learning, e-learning, online learning, distance education, distance learning. What we are talking about, all of us, is how do we put our technical skills and our imagination to work to ensure that no matter where you're working, no matter where learners are having to take their learning experience, that what they experience is of the highest quality, and that it brings together the components that we know are so essential: student support services, pedagogical design, the most optimal use of the media that you might have available to you. So all of these components have been there throughout my career. And as I said, the only thing that I see changing is, in a sense, the terminology, and the fact that each generation seems to need to reinvent the process in order to own it, but the principles remain the same.
I wanted to get you to reflect on the prospects of distance education in other areas, such as in the development sector, such as in the non-formal sector. Do you think there are opportunities there, and where are the opportunities there?
The opportunities are boundless, and the self-determining nature of adult learning in particular is one which has throughout time determined, that if you need to know something, you're going to find out. As human beings are curious beings, and they'll find their way to master what they need to know in order to gain what they want. We're very self-interested people, I think, as humans. Now, obviously, the kinds of systems that might be put around these depend entirely on what you want as an outcome, and how you want that outcome to be recognized.
Where do you see the contributions? How do you see the contributions of distance education in that area?
Well, it's critical. So, because we know that distance education has that capacity to meet needs in difficult situations, and that the ingenuity that is in the technical skills and the expertise that we have developed in distance education, then knowing that there are still many, many populations and sectors of the population that have not the advantage of access to education. it is an absolute imperative that we organise ourselves to ensure that all individuals, and I go back to education for all individuals have a right to participate. And so in, say, the farming communities, and particularly in the development of skills for minority groups like women within those communities, we now have the capacity through technology to enable that. And they have a right to their livelihood. And we all have a right to our access to the opportunities that are going to help us reach our potential. And most particularly for women, that means the potential of their families, the potential of their communities. And in that sense, obviously, the way in which we reach out with distance education, it's a moral imperative. I mean, I'm fairly passionate about this, that I see while I see distance education as having applications in every sector and in every mode of delivery, when it comes to the global responsibility, then it's a very, very serious moral imperative.
What do you think are the key drivers at the moment, or key challenges at the same time at the moment in higher education?
Well, in higher education, if we're talking universities,
yes.
then we're really talking now about survival on a funding basis. So the most constant driver at the moment in higher education is revenue, alternative sources of revenue. Throughout the world, there's been a steady defunding into the university sector. So the belief that distance education, online learning, is a lever to leverage and maximise their embedded infrastructure is what's driving most of the development. And it's a very highly competitive global market now.
Is this trend world over the same? I'm just thinking about what the American culture is doing, how the American culture is driving the terminology. The American culture, which is a very large English-speaking culture, is using the term distance education to represent a range of online learning and flexible learning and e-learning opportunities. But is that the same throughout the world?
Of course it's not, like we all use terms differently in different contexts, and it's very confusing. And you're right, in the US, the use of the word distance learning can often refer to live broadcast and, so therefore simultaneous television type education. And we know as practitioners with research foundations in distance learning that distance education is a field of study, a field of research, which brings with it a very serious consideration of philosophy, approaches to the student, and understanding of how to put in an appropriate system, etc. So one of the dangers with the emergence of, I guess, desktop style access to distance learning systems is that you lose track of what really makes a very effective distance learning experience. But at the same time, because we now have this convergence, it's important for everybody to move to a common understanding. And my preference is to begin to think about what we do in education is we need to think of ourselves as designers. And we design the learning experience, regardless of whether it's on campus, off campus, a hybrid, where the students are remote, etc. For each of those contexts, we need to understand the learner's position and the discipline that we're teaching. And I believe therefore in a strongly developed design culture in education.
But there is a thing called mode. This is why we've got distance education. This is why we've got face-to-face teaching. So what happens to mode? Are you saying that that's not important at all?
Not at all. I'm saying that mode it's one of the design components. So we now have the capacity to design a learning experience with using multiple modes in any one learning experience. Not always. In some contexts, it's not possible. So, on a continuum of modes, it's up to the designer, the person in charge of actually orchestrating a learning experience for a group of learners, whether that be an academic coordinator or a person who is a program manager, who's putting together a team in order to meet the needs of a particular target group. In every one of those cases, they have to make decisions, and the decisions are based on the design of this learning experience. And the access to mode is becoming one that we should be more comfortable. And I think in all fields of our working day and our living lives, we are experiencing this multiple mode, and that flows into education.
However, the service provider, the organization that provides the service, can choose to offer its services in certain modes.
Exactly.
And then you, as a user, decide where you want to go.
Yeah.
Are you saying that this is then going to be the new way of defining distance education, or defining learning and teaching, perhaps, not just distance education?
Yeah, I think, we get so caught up in the way in which we have ourselves conceptualized our field of practice. And I think all the time we need to be challenging ourselves and shaking ourselves up, and saying, okay, what we need to do is we have to walk in the shoes of the people who we are working for. We have to stop thinking about it from our perspective and think about it from, what is the world expecting? What are people out there, what do 18-year-olds expect as learners? What do 35-year-old mid-career IT professionals expect as learners? What do women farmers in Nigeria expect as learners? We have to walk in their shoes and understand the world. What are they experiencing? In the specialised distance learning institutions, there are also these changes towards not mode as we used to understand it, but in terms of interactive technologies. So because access to interactive technologies through personal devices, etc., is increasing, institutions which are, the mega universities who have an embedded infrastructure around what we would call our conventional or traditional distance education delivery are changing at the edges. So in some of their programs, as they're introducing them, they are experimenting with technologies which require students to have a more interactive engagement. And this leads then to the provision of services which extend the envelope a little bit. So I think what we're seeing is that yes, it's on a continuum, and yes, in a mega institution, the systems, in a sense, hold us to a particular way of delivery, and so they should, because they're robust, they're reliable, and we know that they meet the needs, But as demand continues to grow, as it is, and as we seek to develop new open universities who will begin with a new infrastructure and a new type of technological environment, they will have indeed another way of engaging with the same populations that, and so innovation and continuous creativity is what we're about, because we're all designers. And we're going to continue to design to meet the needs of learners.
It seems like from your conversation then, or from your ideas then, reflections then, the future of distance education methods looks bright.
It's extremely bright. I mean, I think that what we need to do is to promote our expertise. One of the issues is that by hiding behind our, I guess, the way in which we define ourselves and not, in a sense, embracing the new generations of people who want to call it something else, we're in fact doing ourselves a disservice. We're disappearing into the past instead of forging ourselves into the future and saying, read this, look at what we've done, learn from us, but we need to be republishing. We need to be researching and saying, this was how we saw things, and this is how it is now relevant, but this is what we're ditching because we're moving on. And I think we need that type of evolutionary approach to our own research, and not to get too precious about it, and to actually embrace the fact that there are so many other people who are taking on distance learning methods and modes, but they lack the experience, they lack the grounded research, they lack the understandings that's been gained in the single mode universities.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. Thank you very much for speaking with the Commonwealth of Learning.
Thank you very much, Tom.